Buddy!
Hey! Getting on your podcast! How nice is this?
I feel like this has been a long time coming, and we're not actually in the same place all that often.
It's true.
But the fact that you're going to be down here today, figured we'd have this guy in person. So, for those that do not know who I'm talking with, this is Kelsey Heikoop, my business partner and best friend for almost 30 years. So I'm gonna, so a couple of disclaimers. So the Machine Shop, here I go. The Machine Shop Mastery Podcast is generally, or is very much not a Pro Shop podcast. I don't wear my normal Pro Shop shirt. I don't talk about it. Occasionally my guests who are clients do mention it. It's by no means a main topic of conversation. And I have guests on that are not clients at all, that I just met the first time when I had them on the podcast. But you are obviously my business partner, and we're one of the key founders of Pro CNC. And I wanted to do this one because, quite frankly, you're one of the most inspiring machine shop owners I've ever known. And so I feel like you have an immense amount of wisdom to share with the metalworking nation, as the making chips guys call it.
Yeah.
I love that term. And so I think it was just long overdue for me to kind of sit down and talk with you about the original origins and the story and the growth of Pro CNC.
That's awesome. I'd love to talk about that. I have a lot of really fond memories, and I think also a lot of hard-learned lessons that I think people could benefit from. So yeah. I'm glad to be here. Thank you. And I'm also really glad and also inspired by the idea that people can take the conversations you're having with all of these different perspectives and use them as part of their own growth. I think that's an important and harder thing to come by than it should be. Like, it's amazing how much information is out there and how little of it is something you can actually take with you going forward.
Yeah, and the goal of the podcast is to share the wisdom of more experienced shop owners and leaders with those that have less experience, and you have a ton of experience. So yeah, the fact that we're partners is great, but I know the wisdom you'll share is universal.
Yeah.
So let's start at the beginning. Tell me about the founding of your shop.
Yeah, I'm actually really excited to talk about it because I feel like it comes from a really cool place of interest and of following something that you really care a lot about as a way to run a company and have a machine shop. I don't know that many people who decide to start in their garage a machine shop because they're like, you know what, if I could choose any money-making venture, and I wanted to pick the one that got the most money ever, I'd started my garage with a machine shop.
Well, particularly people that had no experience in the industry. Yeah. It does happen a lot that people work in a shop, and they're like, my boss is a jerk, and I want to, work on my own and do my own thing, and lots do that, and lots have success, but it's tough.
Yeah, and I think that's the part, is that they're doing it because they love it. They started in their garage instead of, getting into, business banking or something, because they love making stuff. And I think that's where it started for me, and certainly for the founders at Pro CNC. We started building stuff that we thought was really awesome stuff to make. And that making drive, the interest to be somebody who makes things, is a real core foundation, I think, and something you can stick with as you build your manufacturing business. It's really a way to be in the world. The machining nation, right? It's like, it's like, oh yeah, it is a mindset. It's a trust, and it's a belief in making things that are, most of the time you're making them because they're supposed to be useful, and so, or beautiful. There's that too, but or both. So the founding part, right? We started with having some manufacturing experience, and deciding that basically it should be no problem to get a car company off the ground a couple of years after starting a machine shop.
Why don't you go back just a tiny bit? And for those watching on video, I put a couple of machine parts on the table. 2 are from Pro CNC, and 2 of these are from our college years where we built Formula SAE cars.
All right, we're going to go way back.
Yes,
Before the... Yeah, so, that's another great part, I think, about manufacturing and machine shops is oftentimes you kind of make do with what you have. And we were in a program that had a bunch of amazing resources in terms of machines available, a bunch of materials and supplies from Boeing surplus. It was just like giant slabs of aluminum everywhere, and we were like swimming in raw materials. And we were like, what are we going to do? How are we going to build these cars? It's like we wanted to make these single-seat race cars. And we decided that one of the ways we could do that was sort of more on an aircraft-type design with, aluminum hog-out as the foundation and combining that with composites knowledge to build these cars. And so we started building, cool stuff that we thought was technologically advanced and in that vein of machining. So this is actually a dual rear disc brake set for the Formula cars, for these little single-seat race cars. And they've got the sliding mechanisms on here so that your caliper doesn't have to move around. You can have a static caliper that grabs, and these all slide back and forth on this crazy spline that we thought was like super cool. But we were building this kind of stuff as like, solutions to problems that we knew we were facing when we were talking about trying to race cars and make them light and do things, in an innovative way. And the other part of that, since you mentioned it, was these guys here.
And then most people can't see you.
Oh, right. Yeah, you mean this this part here? Yeah. This is like internal, hog out pieces, and this was a technology that we got introduced to through a couple different methods. But this is a bonded, gets bonded together, and so we were making aluminum hog outs in college that we were bonding together to then build chassis members. So this was like part of the structure
of the race car.
Of the race car. So I'm going to try and bounce that back there and see if I can get it to stay. So yeah, building stuff was that passion, and we thought being 22 and yeah, we're out of college, and I bet the next thing we could do is start a car company. But we weren't quite that naive. We thought it would take a little bit of capital, and we didn't really have that. But the best thing we could start with is a company that could do all those things, could manufacture all that stuff. And so we went ahead with starting a machine shop. My brother, amazing guy, agreed to second mortgage his house and get us some startup capital. And we had kind of enough to rent a little 2,000 square foot shop in Monroe, Washington, and lease a Haas VF4. And that was like, and we got contacts, we know people, and so let's start building stuff.
Started knocking on doors looking for work.
Yeah, and in the very earliest days, there were 6 of us, all worked together on the Formula team, and we got 6 people, 1 CNC.
That thing ran around the shift when there was work for it. It's all around the clock.
Yeah, and we were just doing all the jobs and doing everything that we could. And it turned out that, growing and building machine shops is of course hard, and anybody who's tried that knows. Part of it is that it's a really massively complicated set of work. So if you look at what machine shops have to do and what we had to do, it's like super complicated. I mean, we joked about it, but I think it's literally, one of the hardest businesses to be in. There's so much going on and so much that can go wrong, and sometimes the, costs sunk into it are so high. It's just big challenges. But that's where it all started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so we bought a Haas, rented our space, we started knocking on doors, we found a little bit of work. What were those first couple of years like?
Yeah, I mean, hilarious now looking back on it, but pretty rewarding but challenging. I mean, for starters, we didn't have any money, so we started out not getting paid. That was like, the baseline. It's like, oh right, not getting paid at all. Okay, well, I mean, luckily enough, if we all lived in the same house, we could afford to have less money. So yeah, we had, I think it was 4 of us for a while, all living in, of the 6 of us, all living in one house.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were doing a ton of working around, all the angles, the sales angles that you were working, the programming, the, you know, getting them parts machined, the sourcing and supplying. It was all the stuff, and it was fun to be a generalist, but also kind of tiring. And one of the things that made it really, really possible for me was my great partners. Mm-hmm. I found that so refreshing, and you know, as long as somebody had a really positive attitude every day, we were doing well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have just huge respect for shop owners that do it alone, where they're the only sole owner. Everyone else is an employee.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of them, they get into a bubble, right? They don't have other shop leaders or owners they feel like they can talk with and share their problems or ask questions of. You know, some of them do find their way into organizations that they can have peer groups
Right.
and stuff like
Yeah,
that,
like
but a lot of them don't.
and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
NTMA. But a lot of them don't choose that path. So yeah, having that, the train is going to go by here. It's going to get a little loud for a second. It's the nature of the downtown waterfront, Bellingham. Maybe we'll edit this out. So just hit mute, but the muted button is way over there. So it wasn't that far into it that we started to kind of specialize, right, in our respective roles. You really fell into the sort of highly technical side, programming, machining, fixturing, operations. I got more into sales and marketing, estimating. I still did plenty of setups. I still have some of those little parts that I did all the programming and setups on. But tell me about some of the principles that you really kind of leaned into and embraced early on.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different things to talk about there. There's sort of some of the technical principles, like you were saying. I got involved in that part, and I think it became clear, even as we were, only 6 or 8 or 10 people, that communication and being able to, successfully transition things through different stages, even successfully from getting the material ordered in and ready to be machined. Just having the different people involved in that and having that all go smoothly started to become real clarity about that process. All the auxiliary stuff, all the handoffs, what if the night shift needs to take it over? Those levels of personal interactions between people became really important. And I've seen in tons and tons and tons of shops, the little notepad beside the machine that has the latest updates with whatever's going on with that machine. Sure. And the reason that's evolved is because it's super important. How many times do we need a little bit of information and we make maybe questionable choices because we didn't have it, right? Yeah. So that's definitely a philosophical piece, but also a highly technical piece that came pretty early in the process.
And one of the things that I think is clearly different, especially looking back, about Pro CNC and most shops is you wanted it to be paperless.
Yeah, it's true, and I think where we were really running up against it, in terms of why so hard going on the paperless side, was really about sort of that natural evolution of wanting information and needing information, and realizing that you have a really hard time sharing that stuff if it's all just in one physical place. And back then we weren't all hooked up on the internet and everything was just going. Sure. It was the early days of, believe it or not, that was the early days of the internet.
It was 97 when we started the shop.
It wasn't even a foregone conclusion that it was going to take the world by storm at that point. But what happened was it was clear that the information needed to be there. And I remember, it's well, can you get me that? It's well, yeah, I've got to email you that. It's well, it's really hard to, and there weren't really even cameras. It's hard to imagine, but in 97, it wasn't like everybody had a digital camera. You just crazy. Sure. But no, we didn't have them. And so it's well, how else can we do this? And I remember you know, firing in some quotes from wherever you were, I forget where you were, emailing me back some quotes, you know, with the stuff, and it was like, yeah, that's important that we have that as a digital concept. And then the workstation piece became really clear early because we wanted to have clear information right where we were working. And that just like...
Yeah, and back in the day, of course, this is pre LED or LCD monitors, so we had the big 17-inch, 19-inch CRT monitors that weighed like 70 or 80 pounds.
Yep.
And, but yeah, workstation there. And just tell us a little bit about, you built them out of Excel, but just the concept of what you built and with all the different sheets and the tabs within the sheets.
Yeah, that was interesting. I mean, I'm not the expert Excel person in the room. There's people who are absolute Excel wizards, and I will tell you that Excel is the best software product ever produced, period, full stop, as far as I can tell. And it's because it's an absolute Swiss Army knife all the way to the nth degree if you know how to use it. And lots of our manufacturing data, which is super complex, does well in those kinds of environments. The Excel spreadsheets, this does that, this causes that. And so that was just the easiest place to start with something we knew. But then it was clear that you couldn't have them all just like dumped onto a folder somewhere. It's like, oh, I don't know, go look in the folder and see what you can find. It started to be obvious that there needed to be connections between them, which is old hat now, everything has connections. But that idea isn't even fully embraced by lots of companies now, that idea that everything has to link to something else and be available so that you can get there. Talking about it even just like in modern organizations, can you realistically know where to go to find what you need, right? And it's like, if you can't, of course that's a big waste of time. And that goes for tooling modules and fixtures and work instructions and all the stuff you need. Reviews for people's performance, like where do you go? How do you get that? It's all that kind of stuff. Right?
Yeah.
So that's where it started, with the hyperlinks on spreadsheets to other spreadsheets, and then eventually Visual Basic macros, so that when you created a new work order, we created another spreadsheet with multiple tabs, and they're just everywhere. Yeah. And
that ultimately turned into the foundation of what would become ProShop one day. Let's talk about people for a little bit.
Yeah.
Back in '97 to 2000, as we were in Monroe, the economy was pretty good. Manufacturing was kind of was vibing, and we fairly quickly needed to hire some people. Do you remember some of the earliest, how we found them, what we did to make sure we hired good people? I know there was a few times we got, we had some people that weren't the best fit ever. But I think all in all, we did amazingly well. Yeah,
and I think one of the things we learned early on was when the fit's not right, be really clear that it's not, but then go ahead and change the dynamic, which, in our case meant they weren't the right fit for us, they had to go somewhere else. So we definitely fired people who weren't a fit for us. And I talk about it kind of, in nice terms, like PC terms, like it wasn't a fit, but sometimes it's just people aren't doing the job, or have something completely else going on in their life, and are
don't show up, or they're drunk.
Exactly. Drunk and on a machine shop is lousy.
Not a good fit.
Yeah, lousy. So I don't think our hiring practices were super developed then, but I think we understood that people who we could relate to and who made a lot of sense to us and who appreciated what we were thinking it should be like were the obvious fits. And then, of course, there's talents and skills that you just can't go without, right? It's like, I'm going to hire you as a programmer, but I've never seen programming before. It's like, oh, that's going to be a longer road, Depending what you need, that may still be a good move. I've never seen Mastercam before, but, after this job interview was coming up, I spent all last weekend looking at it, and look at what I made so far. It's like, oh, right, that's the kind of attitude that helps us get where we want to be. And I think the other thing was open. That's a key element. Open to change, open to things being different, open to, making their own changes along the way. And people who are like, it's only got to be this one way. We're too dynamic in manufacturing. Things keep changing all the time. Yeah. So people side, the other part that I would say is for sure we find out some, which is always a factor. And then, the good choices that we did make, we really tried to hold on to and make part of the group, include them in the process, not pigeonhole people into their own cog. Hey, that's your deal over there. Don't come talk to me about this other thing. People really want to know and are interested, bring them in, because that's how they'll stay as part of your company and stay engaged.
Right. So those first few years, again, good economically, good economy, but then it wasn't good all of a sudden.
Oof.
And I'd love to talk about how we survived the ups and downs in the economy. And maybe you could just share a little bit of what happened after 9/11 and our workload.
Yeah. So one of the things that we didn't have a good concept on was sort of being overcommitted to a small number of clients. And the 9/11 was, a huge impact on the commercial aerospace side. But it wasn't just them. There were definitely other places in the markets that were getting really hit hard by that change in the economic condition. And we had some tough lessons to learn in there. We, I think, misgauged how bad it would be for us, and it wasn't good. We didn't scale down at the right times, and ended up, getting some debt that we probably could have avoided. It's fairly expensive, business administration degree.
Yeah. And scale down is a euphemism for let people go, right?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
they're our biggest expense.
Yeah, for sure. And the machines are hard to send back and oh yeah, I don't want to pay for this one anymore. I mean, there are some ways in which you can do that, but most of the time it's hours. It's people's time and hours. Not every manufacturing business is like that. Certainly machine shops are heavier,
yeah.
On that. And there's always the, exceptions, but in general, that labor cost is really hard to pass. I mean, to let people go and say, we can't afford to have you because these are the people I just finished saying 2 minutes ago you want to bring in, make part of the team, make part of the engagement. And now you're like, hell, I can't afford to have you. And that was hard. It was hard to flip that.
Yeah, I know right now in January 2023, I see a lot of disparity in how busy shops are. Some are absolutely slammed, and some are saying on LinkedIn, "Hey, I got short lead times," which is a euphemism for I don't have work right now.
Right.
What advice would you give to shops that are facing a slowdown in their work? Because I would say we learned enough lessons through the 9/11 part that the 2008 meltdown, we navigated that considerably better.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing that I think everybody should hear, really clearly, is that you have to be sales driven. You can't be driven by what you hope will happen in the future or, sort of some kind of promise that should arrive. It's got to be based on what you can really sell right now. Some people have the total luxury of a whole bunch of long-term contracts in the future, and they're not as affected. But most of the time, most of the machine shops that I see, they have a real dependence on new work every month. And if you can't get that work this month, you don't want to wait 6 months before you're like, yeah, I haven't got work for the last 6 months, and I've been paying everybody for 6 months worth of work we don't really have to produce. But the flip side of that, which is the positive side, which is when you see that starting to happen, do something about it right away. Go get more work if you don't want to be in a position to be laying people off. And I say it you just run out and find some more work. I think most people recognize that machine shops in general don't try that hard to find work.
Oh, most of them are terrible at it. Quite honestly.
Is that me being too nice? Okay.
Yeah. Most of you all watching and listening are terrible at sales. And it's not a surprise. That's not where you came from, right? That's not where we came from either.
Yeah.
You're a machinist, you're a tool and die maker, you're someone that loves manufacturing, and you start a shop, and you're a technician in the craft. You're not a business person. And I always advise, and we learned this lesson the hard way, because after 9/11, we were, weeks away from insolvency, right? And we had to, on Hawaiian Shirt Friday, had to lay off 5 or 6 people, or however many we did. Yeah, we've never had a Hawaiian shirt day for many years, or if ever again. And the business advisor we found, thankfully, through the Small Business Development Center, which are a national organization, look into it, and your local universities, or your local MEP. Really, that guy Tom, he really taught us to be sales driven, and for me that meant always doing sales even when you're busy, because that cycle of I got lots of work, I need to focus on getting that work out the door, so I'm going to stop going and doing marketing and doing sales calls for new prospects. It's really hard to not do that because you're so busy getting the work out the door.
Yeah.
But the reality is, for a consistent amount of revenue, which is necessary, because with X amount of machines and X amount of rent and X amount of employees, there is a break-even point at which, if you're below that, your bank account is going negative.
And I think that's an area where machine shops underestimate the delta. Like, it'd be great if it was like, oh, I can break even at 80% capacity, and then it just all gets better up to 100%. But I think they miss it in that it might be 94% for your shop. That's your break even. So you only got 6% to 100. Like, there's not a big delta.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot that was something we talked about. What is your capacity in terms of, if all your machines were running with the 1 or 2 shifts or whatever shift schedule you have, your employees at an X amount of efficiency rate,
yeah,
how much revenue can you generate, and how much higher is that than your break-even point?
Yeah. And what happened basically for us, if you look at it from that lens in the 2000, the 9/11 crisis, is that we had that, like, yeah, okay, we've got all these people, this could happen. But we didn't have the sales, right? And it wasn't like, oh my gosh, we don't have half of our business anymore. It wasn't, it was like 30% less or 25% less or whatever it was. But it was way more than the delta between our break even and our full capacity. Right? We just didn't move on that.
So started draining our bank account, stopped taking pay again.
Yeah.
Although this time our wives and kids or whatever were expecting us to keep getting paid, so that was incredibly stressful. And ultimately, yeah, we had to make those hard calls.
What I was going to say about the information, like you were talking about it being scalable, and I give the example of the person with the floppy disk, and they like stick it in their toolbox, and
Sure.
they're like, I have the right program, whatever they're giving from the programming office, when there was floppy disks. But my point about that is, you're giving people an opportunity to contribute back, and I think that's the other piece of the scalable nature you're talking about, which is even paper. It's extremely difficult to really imagine that whatever notes you're putting on there are somehow going to make it all the way through some complicated chain back to making more parts, right? And so that double piece of making it available everywhere, but also allowing people to recontribute, just escalates that curve of knowledge and productivity in a way that I don't think you can in old.
Yeah, one of my prior guests, Ken Frankel, you know.
Yeah, right.
He said the thing that will set a company apart from all their competitors is if they can increase the rate of improvement, the rate of learning in the organization.
Yeah.
If you can make that even 10% more than your competition, and that compounds year over year,
Right.
you are
It's
just
like
going to
compound
hockey
interest.
stick. Yeah, just like compound interest. Compound learning is so powerful.
Yeah.
And especially you talk about, small numbers, because the machine shop business is as difficult as it is, and the way I think about, quoting and bringing in new work is you basically have one chance to get it right and like 1,000 chances to get it wrong. You quote it at a certain rate, to do it a certain way, with a certain amount of material and cutting tools and whatever else, and if all goes well, you're gonna make that 10 or 20% margin. But if it goes sideways, and jobs go sideways all the time, you could lose 100% on that job, right? And so, And that the difference between it going well and not going well could be a tiny little thing, you know. It's a note that someone leaves about their shift tie-in. It's cutting the material not half an inch too short because someone hand wrote it and they took a 6 for a 9, or you know, who knows what, right? And so yeah, the more variables we can eliminate from the process, the more chance we are to get it right and make that margin that we quoted.
And I think in order to do that, you really want to build in those self-correction pieces. And the self-correction, not having the guy with the one good program, you know, is to let everybody who knows what's going on contribute back, because that's the error correction, right? Like, that doesn't seem quite right. Let me make sure that, oh yeah, no, that's not quite the right piece of information. Let me fix that. And everybody else has that new fix right away.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, good. All right, let's talk about Lean and ISO and certification, because around 2004, 3 or 4,
yeah,
we decided to get ISO certified. And we also, you really were the champion, decided to really embrace Lean.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
I didn't really know a lot about Lean at the time, and I kind of discovered it. Like I just hadn't been involved in it. It's obviously a long road to Lean to get to here. You know, the concepts have been around since the 50s and Deming, and you know, how come nobody told me about it? But you know, Lean is like a really high level philosophy, and also like this could probably help you if you went and spent 15 minutes on it right now on some job that's running on your floor. So it's both things at the same time, and that's part of its beauty. And you know, there's tons of books. Read all about it. There's great stuff on Lean in all kinds of capacities. But I think for us, one of the fundamental pieces that really helped us embrace that was engaging with people again, but this time with clear purpose to improve our lives, improve the margin, improve the product. All of those things were happening at the same time. And we were getting people to start to see that them spending some time on improvement, kind of like that little bit, the learning bit, the improvement bit, was actually paying off. And it's interesting how motivated people are to get stuff done. Lots of good employees really want to get stuff done. And it's sometimes even a challenge to just like break them away from that a little bit to improve the process, to improve the way we do things. It's hard because they want to hit the quota, they want to hit that piece. So we I think did something very smart, which is said, you know, part of your job is 3% improvement. Expect that all the time. I expect you to time track system improvements at a rate of 3%.
3% of their time.
Of their time,
of
yeah.
a day or a week.
Yeah. And I think once that was clear enough that it was our business principles to improve, not just like, oh yeah, of course, we always have an improvement mentality. As machine shop people, improvement is very much on our mind. It's like a way of life. But there's a difference between that and when you document it and other people share in that and you see the things that other people are improving because they're documenting it, then it becomes that knowledge and that learning and the change in process. So, you know, the simple stuff. Do we have all the tools we need right here? It's like, well, let's have just a little shadow board with the right stuff right here. I wish that every shop I went into today, like that was a solved problem. Every workstation had a little tool board and it had all the tools you need, and it's just not the case. It's just not the case. And it's because it takes a little something to do that.
And it takes it to maintain it.
Yep.
So a lot of shops have started it and haven't continued. So what's some wisdom for shops to have a sustainable, self-sustaining Lean program?
That's a tough one. I think if I had the one sentence answer, the old silver bullet for that, that would be a miracle. But I think there are a few key pieces. I really do, after seeing it for a long time. One of them is, you know, you got to start with people who give a rip. Like, if you've got people who just don't care, it's a non-starter. You're not gonna, you know, I mean, care about
Can you get
keeping it
people
going.
to care with the culture, or you got to hire people that care?
No, you can get people to care, for sure. I mean, most of the reason that I found people don't care is because they don't really see how it benefits them. Like, if you can see how it benefits you, more often you care about it, right? Sometimes it's easy. It's like, you know what, pizza lunches, if we can get this level of, whatever, shadow boards being accurate for 2 full weeks, then lunch is on us. There's those kinds of like, well, I can care enough to get a free pizza lunch to put that back. Some of it is definitely just like building personal relationships. So the person who's next to you or coming after you, you build a relationship between those people of some kind that is benefit to them both, right? It's like, yeah, okay. And I don't know, night shift is like, the classic example of where there's no tie-in, so it's hard to build that through to the morning, right? Like, how do you get the night shift to close out with you? The other way is a little easier, but it then always feels like you come in the morning and, oh, look what the night shift left, It's just like classic. And building up that relationship a little bit so that you actually, have something going there makes that much, much more possible. Because people do things a lot of times when they talk about benefiting someone, it's a bit of a personal relationship thing. Do I feel good about where I'm connecting with somebody else? And it's like simple human dynamics, but it's important. And then there's a couple other key pieces to maintaining. One is you got to make it really public. And I think that's a key element of sort of the negative side. If everybody in the company knows it was you who left the place a whole mess, that doesn't feel good. And you're not trying to call people out, you're not like whipping them, but just make it obvious what happened, right? And things should be like that. And people rise to those occasions. I don't want to be that guy, right? Who left it a mess. Okay, all right. I'll take the extra 2 minutes, even though I'm tired and it's 2 a.m. and I could just go home because there's nobody else here. I'll do it because I don't really want my name to be on it tomorrow.
Right.
And that's not a punishment, it's just an accountability.
Yeah.
And a simple one.
Yeah. So we hired a consultant person through what is now called the MEP network. Before it was not called that, but and Sarah specialized in both Lean and ISO, kind of together.
Lean Sarah,
that's her name. She still works there.
Yeah, she's great.
And so at the same time we pursued ISO certification, and I think it was prudent. It was probably your choice to do Lean and ISO at the same time, because a lot of the complaints that people say about ISO is that it introduces a lot of waste and makes you do things that aren't value added.
Right.
So maybe can you talk a little bit about the interplay between the two and just I mean, the why we did it, I think, was to open more doors for business. Although there's lots of reasons why, even if that's not your motivation, running your company in an ISO compliant or AS9100 compliant way is easily, arguably the most profitable way to run a business, assuming that the processes you add are not terribly onerous.
Right. Well, it's interesting because part of that analysis that we did, and I don't know if you remember this piece, but we did a real meta-analysis on how much more profitable are ISO companies than non-ISO companies. And what came back was, there's like a 3% split. So just across the board, manufacturers who are ISO certified or not, the ISO certified companies were getting 3% more than the non-ISO certified companies in profit. And it wasn't clear whether they could charge more, or they were more efficient, or they were whatever. But that was a real indicator of like, okay, so this can be a method of improving profit. And then we took a close look at like how much of what we saw in the standard was like something we wouldn't say is good practice. What's in there that's like, oh, this is just a dumb idea, right? It turned out that when we read it and said what they needed, very little in there that they were asking us to do that we didn't think was a really smart idea. So then the question became, how do we dramatically minimize the effort to actually report and meet the standard and do the things that they require you document along the way? And it turned out that done well, you can do normal work all day where everyone's work across the entire company is adding the little piece that makes you compliant in just by checking one box or, you know, putting a signature on a particular thing as they flow it through. And so what happened was most of the work was in the best practice. Most of the work was in getting a good business outcome. And there was a tiny piece on the end that we really were able to add to get actual certification. It was almost no extra work.
Right, yeah. And, you know, arguably that's one of the benefits of doing it with software rather than doing it on paper.
Yeah.
Because the paper aspect does legitimately add a ton of extra effort and time. Or even, not just paper, but, you know, Word documents or Excel forms where...
Yeah, independent stuff, where it's not part of your workflow, and it's like, oh yeah, and then fill out this form for our ISO, you know, to maintain our ISO compliance. Like, oh, that sucks. And people, you know, see it as busy work.
Right.
Okay? That's what they call busy work. It's like, I don't know, let's do this so that we can stay compliant. We have to, you know, have a big deal about it. But I think that the analysis is clear from my perspective that once you do a good job of understanding it, that most of the stuff's best practice anyway. You want to do that stuff. You want to have people who know what they're doing. Right? That makes sense. Well, ISO says you got to train people. And you got to know if they're trained or not. It's like, well, we wanted to know if people could do this thing or not anyway.
Sure.
Right? It's not like you started a training program because of ISO. You started showing people how to do stuff so that they could do it. Now, if you had a really easy way to say, yeah, I showed so-and-so this, whatever, click,
Sure.
then now you're ISO compliant without a lot of work and somebody got the knowledge on how to do something. So it's that kind of stuff. Yeah, so that was a great adventure, and I think we were sort of feeling like, after completing the ISO piece, that we were like 85% of the stuff we were already doing before we ever started our ISO journey.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think, and that, I believe, that largely comes down to the fact that you were always just driving being process-driven.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is what ISO is about. Have a process, say how you do it, document that you do it that way, and prove it to us.
Yeah. And they're really big. I mean, and anybody who's been through the AS audits in particular, they're really big on and how are you doing it, making it better, which is like what I said before, right? You just got to have that system where everybody can make it a little bit better all the time. And as long as you can show that to the auditors, they're usually thrilled that you're actually documenting improvement.
Sure.
Right? It's like 90% of the reason they're there. You know, it's like, oh, they didn't like something about your thing. What do they give you? They give you an opportunity to change it and improve. It's like.
So, so we kept growing our shop here in Bellingham, and you know, with the sales growth we were having, after learning about being sales driven, we had to hire a lot of people. You know, we ultimately ended up with 75. But so, what are some of the things you can remember that we did, both to like engage in like workforce development? And some of that was with, you know, engaging in the community, like Bellingham Technical College.
Mm-hmm.
But we also weren't going to have luck without having great retention, which comes down to culture. So, can you share a little bit
there's a
about...
couple pieces I wanted to start out with, which is, you know, and it really sticks in my memory for a few different cases where we had a hiring process that definitely had kind of a 3-step thing. And one of those was really focused on culture. Right? One of those was focused on sort of knowledge, which was like, you know, a little bit of a written level of understanding. Like if you were a machinist, we had 10 questions, and you know, you had to be able to like reasonably answer most of them if you wanted to be coming in as a machinist. And then we had the culture piece first, then the like 10 questions, and then we had a practical piece. Like, yeah, come on into the shop. Let's walk over here together and just do a few tasks together. In the case of setup machinists, we had a little setup, pre-planned setup. They got an aluminum block. They had to make the P with the and they do a little few measurements on it. I don't know if you remember all that.
I do not remember.
Yeah. That was a big part of the machinist piece. And what was interesting is there were a bunch of people who self-selected out because they were like, I'm not writing a test. I don't have to prove myself to you. I was like, perfect. You absolutely do not. There's probably somewhere else that's going to love your talents, right? And it wasn't about proving it to us. It was about knowing whether they were actually that kind of team player and going to help us build a culture like that. And if everybody's coming in going, yeah, the reason they do this test is not to whip us with it, but to know that we're part of the culture. And it's a 360 thing. Like, you're showing them who you are as a culture before they ever start with you. You give them that opportunity to drop out. Because if they don't like the idea that, yeah, we're going to have to show up and talk to other people and like do work together. What?
Yeah.
I know labor markets fluctuate a lot. We've been through a little period of really tight labor markets, like insanely tight. And people were like, I'll just hire anybody who's willing to work like 5 days a week consistently. I get that. And that's the hardest time to maintain culture. But I think that piece of knowing who you are enough, and especially when it's not that tight, is always open for even the skill set that you think is baseline entry. Like, do you have passion to do anything mechanically oriented? Great, come in and let's do a little something together. It still works, right?
So that you said that first step was the culture part.
Yeah.
What was that? I mean, I remember interviewing people and asking them, what are your hobbies? What are your passions? What do you care about? What do you love? Was there more than that, or?
I mean, part of it is starting to ask real questions that are slightly uncomfortable, maybe. Like, how do you treat people? How do you resolve conflict? And not just how, like, give me the broad strokes. Oh, I'm always really nice to people. It's more like the question of, tell me about the last time you had a disagreement with a coworker and how you handled it. That's not one where you can be like, oh, well, normally I would. It's like, no, I want to hear about the one you did, right? And that says a lot. I mean, even people, I had one person who was like, I don't want to talk about conflict. It's like, well, you don't live in the real world. Everybody has some level of conflict, and it was just clear that they were so conflict averse, it was going to be a problem because there was going to be something that somebody didn't like. Yeah. So that was.
I do remember our policy. It might be worth talking about this. Of if you have a conflict with somebody, it's our company policy that you have to go talk to them directly first. And
if you can.
If you can, if you feel that's safe or whatever. And if you can't get resolution, you have to come to one of the owners. You can't badmouth them. You can't talk to your coworkers behind their back.
Yeah, there was a couple people who had to leave Pro CNC because they couldn't get that message. And they started like trying to get people on their side. You notice what a jerk so-and-so is? It's like, oh, wrong culture.
Right.
You're in the wrong place now. Yeah. That turned out to be profound. And we had some incredibly good growth moments for individuals where they came back right away and years later and said, I learned so much from having to actually deal with conflict with coworkers. I've been in the business 30 years, never had to do this before, and I'm a better person because you helped me resolve conflict instead of turn into a big pissing match with the guy at the machine next to me.
Right.
That's a real culture builder. Yeah.
Excellent. So one of the questions I ask is, what is your approach with transparency around finances with the team?
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
So I'd love to talk about how we did that.
Yeah, from really early days, we felt like there was a really good opportunity to build trust and let people see sort of how we're doing in a way that, I think often speaks to people, which is the money. How are we doing on the money, And it's interesting, I actually read a book right around 2003, 2004, and it's called Maverick. And it was about a super interesting Brazilian guy who took over his father's business and tried to revolutionize it because it was in deep trouble. And Brazil went through 40% inflation for like, a period. It was just like ridiculous. But anyway, what that helped me, and I think us do, was say, hey, there's a lot of opportunity for us to build trust, engage people with more transparency about the financials. And we report our profit at every meeting, right? And we had monthly meetings and we recorded them for everybody, and we talk about what went well. I mean, we even talked about some of the, net profit for this period, right? And for most of our history, we had that profit sharing as part of our context. Profit sharing can be very powerful, and I think doesn't have to be, 50% of the profits. It doesn't have to be like that to be very powerful. Letting people know that you do actually value them in a way that includes them in how well it's going, it can be a much smaller number and still be meaningful.
Yeah. Do you think that helped with the buy-in that you talked about earlier, even with like lean improvements? Like, how does this impact me if I spend 15 minutes now to make this process better?
I really got the feedback that it did, which makes me think, yeah, it really made a big difference. It wasn't just my impression. People would come to me and say, the way you do this, the way you include us in this, motivates me on my job every day. And it's interesting because some people were saying things like, could I get paid for my own good idea? And I get that. That's an individualistic, like, hey, I have a good idea. How come everybody else should get involved in however good that is? And I got that, except that everybody helps everybody else. So your good idea is an opportunity for improvement, but it's all supported by all the other people in the organization. And it's a lot harder to be like, hey, I've got this, great idea about, how to answer the phone quicker at the front desk or whatever, and you pay me for that, as opposed to like, I'm going to shave 2 minutes off this cycle time. I think I should get something for that, right? But all those systems support each other in ways that are really hard to unwind. And so we found it really hard to give like individual incentives for someone's improvement, and instead better to be like, you know what, we're in this together. That also created a different dynamic. I think when you have everybody's out there trying to find all their own best solutions, it can work, but you also get that very individualistic sort of like lone gunslinger kind of mentality.
Sure. Yeah, and I remember, at company meetings, everyone standing around with a big projector screen, sharing the numbers and talking about, I remember I can't remember how long we did it for. I think it was for quite a while, where we would pick out some winners and some losers from the jobs in that month, and really sort of drill into what went well, why, or what didn't go well and why.
Yeah.
And did we even have people involved in?
Absolutely. I was going to say, in our best moments, and really as we got more mature, we started getting into a safe enough environment where people would be willing to share their part in something that didn't go so well. It's easy to share your part in something that went awesome, right? But it's hard to share your part in something that didn't go very well. But if you know that the people who are there are trying to learn how to not make that mistake again, or trying to learn how to support our team better, and they really believe it, then it happened already. We can't change that. And you can be pissed off at the person who was at the point of failure, but it's very unlikely that that's the only thing. Just like, So instead,
generally it's a breakdown in the process.
Almost always, right? And if it was an individual, like, I slipped and dropped this thing, it's also the case that people have a little bit of like, everybody has broken a glass in their life. Like, that happens, right? But most of the time, that's not where the big issues are anyway. The big issues are systemically going wrong, right? And most of the jobs that are big losers, they go slightly wrong and don't actually get a full course correction, and then they go more wrong. Like, it's like, there's not that many jobs that are just a little off. They're either like a little bit good, or they're like just pitiful.
Sure.
And pitiful is usually because we didn't get on it, right? So those meetings and our ability to share that financial information was pretty good. It really, I think, helped motivate people in the right direction.
what were the metrics that we really paid attention to?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was different at different levels, for sure. Like, we had, like cell metrics that were just specifically for one work cell, maybe even, a product line or something like that, and we'd have individual throughput type metrics or even improvement metrics for those. And then we'd kind of have like shift type metrics. So one of the things at that level that we often looked at is like, how often as a team are we actually working on product? Because if we're not working on product, it's unlikely we're making money with that time. When they're focused on those really difficult problems and those hard issues, and they're trying to get from minus 10% margin on this really hard job all the way up to scratch, because that'd be a nice thing, is that they don't leave themselves enough headspace to take the job that's already 10% margin and make it 30% margin.
Right.
They just can't focus on that stuff because they're mired in the really hard problems. And so that has that extra knock-on benefit. We eliminate the really stuff that's negative gross margin, would be better off not doing it at all. And we open up a little bit of that time to get much better at things that may already be not that bad.
Yeah.
There was a few jobs that I remember specifically where, we were making twice what we would make on other jobs. Literally twice the hourly rate on this work. And this is amazing. This is, what do we need to do? We don't need to touch that. It's going great. And somebody came along and said, yeah, but couldn't we do this and this? And wouldn't that get us another 50%? And it did. So now we're at a job that's 250%.
Right.
And you're like, that was really worth it.
Sure.
It wasn't the one that was going wrong, right?
So that's an example of doing something right. What are some of the biggest mistakes?
Well, you talked about it earlier. Not understanding how important matching your sales volume with your costs early on was a huge issue. Almost cost us the whole business, right? So focus on sales driven being the way to determine how much you can actually spend on that stuff is really important. That's something we literally just go off the farm on.
Just a second longer on calculating your break-even point and calculating your capacity and how you want to ideally build those together.
Yeah. So a really simple calculation is like, if you take the team you have that does the real revenue generating piece, that's probably the machining mostly, but it may be some of the assembly or a few other areas where you're generating revenue. And you look at, well, if we had all the work, if it was all there, and these folks were all working to, the efficiency rate, we know they really are 85% or whatever, what would be our approximate revenue? Of course, you want to look at approximate percentage of cost of goods for like materials and outside processing and stuff, but then you've got something there to work with, and you have then that sort of understanding of sort of maximum capacity. One thing I wanted to say about maximum capacity, and this took us a little while to learn, and I feel like it's undervalued in general, is this idea about paying for overtime. I've heard people saying, I don't want to pay for overtime, it costs extra money. And I think there's a piece missing there that's double important in terms of value to the company, which is when we started doing the math, anything up to 20% overtime was financially cheaper than trying to take 5 people who are 20% over and hire someone new.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Like that's actually, if it's less than 20% overtime for 5 different people, that's still cheaper than trying to hire someone new. But it has all these upsides for people who want to work overtime, which is there's a bit of a buffer. They're not working from 80% to a full salary. They're working from a full salary that they're counting on to some extra cash in their pocket. And when work fluctuates more and less, that they still have a full-time job.
Got it. Yeah.
And
whereas
that's
if you
really
hire
important.
that fifth person, that last person, and then your workload dips, everyone's on reduced hours.
Or you
you're
make the
losing
other
money.
mistake where you lose money because you don't want to not pay. Like, people have to live.
Sure.
And that's the other thing. Most people live right at their means, so they don't actually have an option to really work for you for very long at 80% or 90%.
Right.
That's a very short-lived deal, right? So that's where I think that overtime and encouraging people who are interested to work some of that overtime. And 20%, it's not just for one person 20%. It doesn't matter if one person works 50% overtime. It's as a whole manufacturing staff, people who are doing that value added. If as a group they're less than 20% overtime, that's still financially a responsible thing to do. You're not paying more 401k, you're not paying more health benefits, you're not doing all that other stuff. You're just paying 20% overtime premium, right? So, that took us a while to come to. I don't know if that's something we did really wrong.
That's good.
But we definitely experienced that, and our downsizing on Hawaiian Shirt Day was bigger than it needed to be because we hadn't learned that lesson. We could have had a smaller team and not had to let as many people go if we'd known that before we went in. If we'd understood that before we went into that, we probably would have laid off 20% fewer of the layoffs. Right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's a good one. All right, so then let's bring it to sort of the wrap-up question. What do you see the most successful shops today? What are they like? What are they doing right? And the shops that you don't see having as much success, what are they?
Yeah, it's a good one. Well, I mean, if we sort of remove a little bit of the, I'm not going to say luck, but a little bit of the what space you're in currently is hot and, maybe has more margin just intrinsically because, it's that particular kind of niche of the machining industry. Taking that piece out of it, what are the companies like that are doing the best? I mean, it seems to me like many of the companies that are doing the best have the incredibly strong culture. It seems to be a really ubiquitous indicator of strong financial performance is companies that have a strong culture. It's not always one kind of culture, but it's strong and everybody's bought into it. So it's not like, oh, this culture is way better than this culture. I don't know that that's really what I'm talking about. I mean, it's strong, whatever it is, and everybody who's there likes it and wants it that way. So it's not really an ideological thing. It's more like a fundamental business thing, which is have a culture, make it strong, get everyone bought in, because those companies are absolutely succeeding better than others. And then structure from the process control side, from the monitor your things side, from the always get people to continually upgrade those systems and processes. Those are by far the best. And obviously, how could that not be better than just winging it? But it's really obvious. And it's like something you can often tell 10 minutes into a shop. If you haven't gone that far, you're like, I bet that's an issue for you. I bet this is an issue for you. Because you can tell the way the culture is constructed.
Yeah.
And not all shops are beautiful. It doesn't have to be beautiful. It has to be, process driven, the way you are, people bought in, it's the other side of the coin, which is where do I see people going kind of wrong-ish. There's some fundamental pieces. I think massive overcommitment to a single or small set of customers is just super volatile. It can be great when it's great, but if it's not great, now it's not the best for everybody. Being really committed to just a few clients is pretty dodgy.
Dangerous,
Yeah. So I've seen, seen clients recently that had a 70% payroll cut. It's like, whoa, that's an insane amount to be downsizing, right? They have one customer, but the one customer all of a sudden didn't have much work for them.
Right. Yeah.
What are they going to do, right?
Sure.
It takes a while to build up all your new customers. And then the other piece I think is, as much as I really strongly believe in technology, don't take on too many things at once. Companies are literally starving themselves by trying 6 different things at once. lots of things are good. Do one, do it well, get good at it. Whatever new technology you're taking on, whatever new system, unless you have tons of available capacity, just do that thing pretty well. I don't know how many times I've seen people take on 4 things and not really manage to execute on any of them when they could easily have done great with one thing. So it's our natural ambition. We can do it all. You know, the years flow by, and if you don't do it all this year, next year's a good time to take on the next thing.
Yeah, I'd say a common character trait that I see in good leaders of shops is that almost universally, the shops that are most successful and have the best cultures, the shop owners are incredibly humble. They know they don't know all the answers. They want input from their team. They want input from their partners. They want input from their suppliers. They're like sponges for how to do things better and can accept the fact that they don't know it all and not feel threatened by that.
Yeah, I think the not feel threatened part is super important. I've seen a few occasions where people have heard this message and you can see them trying really hard, but they're always worried that, you know, if they say they don't know, that would make them look bad in front of people or whatever. And they're trying really hard to resist that. And it's like, yeah, but being able to realize it and say, it's okay not to know everything. And that's actually kind of the preferred thing, because then other people can shine in the areas they're good at.
Yeah. All right. Any last thoughts or words you want to share?
I mean, you know, I guess the biggest one, and that's really for all of you, is that, you know, I totally get that manufacturing is a tough business in a lot of ways. But it's also been some of the incredibly enjoyable years of my life. You know, making cool stuff for all kinds of industries, products, knowing you're making a big difference in some of these places. And I think it's, you know, profound work that all of us are doing in the manufacturing space, and specifically all of you are doing, building these products in, you know, your shop that is doing its part in some much bigger context. I mean, how does all this stuff get into space? All these cool things that materialize? You guys build them. So it's important work. Stick with it, and I think there's still an amazing future for manufacturing. So that's my...
Thanks, buddy. Yeah, I agree. We all know, we're preaching to the choir, it's the foundation of the economy. Everything starts with machining. But I appreciate you sharing wisdom. It's been great to sit down and
so good.
Share your voice with the with the world. And yeah, thanks.
All right.